10 Topics to Know for Unit 5, The Modern Nigerian State. Nigeria was, of course, a long-time colony of the British Crown. The British played off of many of the ethnic divides that existed in society for their own personal gain and benefit, and designed borders that catered to the largest ethnic groups, which furthered the divide. The southern infrastructure and economy was much more further developed because of the British setting up shop in port towns such as Lagos, while the north was heavily neglected. This, of course, would skew the perceptions of democracy for many Nigerians. Once the Nigerians achieved their own independence in 1960, they set up their first republic to model the British Westminster model. The early republics catered to the north and were very pro-Muslim. Threats of secession and civil war would ensue in the coming years. The first major military coup took place in 1966, and a long history of military rule has happened in the decades that would ensue. Today, many Nigerians believe in democracy, however authoritarianism and interventionism still persist despite the establishment of democratic institutions. The present Fourth Republic of Nigeria was founded in 1999 with the establishment of the current Nigerian constitution, which took power and put it back into civilian hands and out of control of the military. The new constitution established several principles, including the establishment of a federal republic, a system of checks and balances with an independent judiciary, and full suffrage rights. It also included a principle known as the federal character, which established ethnic quotas to be a member of the bureaucracy. It also aimed to reform the military and make it more of a peacekeeping organization. To achieve this goal, the Constitution established the National Youth Service Corps, which was designed to reshape the military's image by requiring all Nigerian youth to service a one-year project in which they would leave their hometowns and regions and have an opportunity to mingle with other ethnic groups in serving their country's democratic good. Though the Nigerian Constitution clearly states checks and balances as one of its goals, the President is still the central figure when it comes to policy making in the country. He serves a 4-year term and is elected by a national first-past-the-post plurality system. The President's powers mirror many of presidents throughout the world, as he is both the head of state and head of government in his country. He is the commander-in-chief of the military, has the ability to sign and veto legislation, can grant reprieves and pardons, and also has the ability to sign treaties with other foreign diplomats. Current President Goodluck Jonathan has stated that one of his goals is to shrink the size of the bureaucracy. This, however, has not happened. The bureaucracy is very large in size and is considered for the most part inept. Attaining a position in the bureaucracy is still done through very corrupt networks of clientelism, particularly one known as prebendalism in Nigeria, which centers around ethnic and religious ties. The bureaucracy is by far the largest employer of Nigeria, where the parastatal sector still plays a very, very monumental role in the economy, particularly when it comes to oil. A country that was once able to sustain itself on agricultural production depends almost exclusively on oil today. Nigeria is a major member of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, which helps determine global market prices for oil. Nigeria is the 11th largest oil producer in the world and the largest on the continent of Africa. Much of its oil comes out of the Niger Delta region of the south. The effects of this oil dependency has been great wealth for the political elites of the country, or big men, while at the same time a complete lack of diversity in the goods and services in the economy, and a huge debt burden caused by a reliance of having to import the technology needed to produce the oil and the infrastructure needed. Also, it is now determined that Nigeria is considered a rentier state, a country in which the bulk of its revenue is completely dependent on one resource, that resource being oil, and that the wealth is consumed at the top of the chain, with many masses of society being left neglected. This has also led to very high levels of corruption. With a lack of a diverse economy, those who cannot get employment within the bureaucracy are left to fend for themselves on petty trade and agriculture. Most Nigerians live on less than $2 American a day. In fact, 1/5 of the current economy lies in the informal sector. With an immensely corrupt state unwilling to let any of the wealth of the country trickle down, Nigeria ranks amongst the world's lowest in terms of the Human Development Index, with very poor healthcare and education systems. This has been a big part of why the HIV/AIDS epidemic has taken off in Nigeria. Because of so many people being left to fend for themselves, high levels of crime have become rampant in the country, with online fraud being one of the biggest ways for Nigerians to make money. Oil bunkering, looting, and kidnapping have also become regular parts of Nigerian life, unfortunately. Poor funding to state and local governments and an inability to enforce tax policies has left a corrupt police force unable to manage the needs of its people. It has caused the states and localities to look to vigilante groups and terrorist organizations to help keep them secure. Nigeria is, of course, very resource-rich, but its implementation of these resources has been very poor. Nigeria did seek out in the 1970s to try to become more of a regional leader in terms of economics with the establishment of the Economic Community of West African States. However, its leadership in this organization has come at a high cost, as many other countries are unable to provide the types of goods that Nigeria can provide for them. The Nigerian state faced a high debt burden entering the new millennium due to years of import dependency and excessive government spending. In the global market demands of the current world economy, Nigeria knew it could not sustain success. Thus, it was forced to liberalize some aspects of its economy in an attempt to modernize. To do this, they applied for a structural adjustment program through the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. The structural adjustment program had three major components. One, Nigeria had to reduce some of its tariffs to try to create a more diverse economy. It also had to try to privatize many of its parastatals and attempt to reduce its government spending to try to get its debt under control. The result of this SAP, while bringing the debt burden down significantly, has also been reduced amounts of social welfare or insurance programs that have decreased the quality of life for many Nigerian people, unfortunately. Still, there have been slow shifts towards privatization, but there has been success in the telecommunication industry, where there has been some influx of international commodities that have influenced policy in recent decades. The Nigerian National Assembly mirrors the United States Congress, at least in terms of its composition, as it is a bicameral legislature with a House of Representatives in which it is organized by regional population, and a Senate in which each state is given 3 members, 1 for the Federal District of Abuja. Its powers also look similar to the U.S. Congress, as it has the ability to pass laws, handle taxation, and impeach executives and judges. However, in reality, its historic reputation has been that of a rubber stamp to the executive. It has had some mild attempts to take back some austerity for itself, but these attempts are still not far-ranging. The Constitution also calls for an independent and secular judiciary. This, of course, is not happening in practice, where common law is being practiced in the South, but the very harsh Islamic Sharia law is occurring in the North. The Nigerian Supreme Court has begun to assert itself in recent years, however, taking on some cases of electoral fraud, government corruption, and the questioning of some presidential powers. Of course, it is impossible to have a conversation about Nigerian politics without acknowledging the massive ethnic, religious, and regional cleavages that cut through all realms of society. Nigeria is one of the most multi-ethnic states in the world, with over 250 ethnic groups, the dominant 3 being the Hausa, Yoruba, and the Igbo. The Middle Belt region of the country is perhaps one of the most volatile places, as many of these ethnicities are forced to clash with each other. In the north, it is mostly Muslim territory, while the south is dominated by Christians, particularly Protestants. This is true of the entire continent of Africa. The result of this divisive history of ethnicity has been a country in which regional identity is far stronger than national identity. This regional identity is known as ethno-nationalism. It is also impossible to discuss Nigerian politics without discussing the imbalance in gender relations within the country. Nigeria has, of course, always been a very patriarchal society, with many legal provisions being put in place to limit women's influences. Women are not permitted to own land or businesses, they are grossly underrepresented in the government, and many of their civil society groups have had to play second fiddle to male groups. The harshest recipients have been northern Nigerian women, who have been the recipients of very harsh Islamic Sharia law practices. However, in modern times, there have been more rises in cases of women's organizations coming into power, particularly in the South. It is important to note that the Nigerian Constitution actually allows for a fully functional and competitive multi-party system. However, in reality, the People's Democratic Party, or PDP, has consistently dominated the political arena. There are several reasons for why the PDP has been able to go pretty much unchecked in recent elections, one of which is that the big man elitist system gives most of the resources to the men in the PDP, and they're able to buy off much of their competition. Also, most minor or regional parties only appeal to very specific ethnic groups, leaving them unable to compete with the much more multi-ethnic PDP. The map here depicts how the PDP in red is able to capture most of the country because of its ability to appeal to various ethnic groups. The vast number of parties that have been created in the system also dilutes the ability for any one particular party to challenge the PDP. Finally, the first-past-the-post plurality system tends to exaggerate the size of victory for the dominant party. While political parties are still relevant in Nigeria today, their biggest goal tends to be mainly how to achieve power and how to utilize it. It is mostly looked at as a vehicle for the big man society. The establishment of the INEC, Independent National Electoral Commission, has attempted to level the playing field somewhat since the establishment of the Constitution by trying to create less ethnically based parties and ensuring more democratic election processes. While political parties have mostly been used as a vehicle for the big men elites, civil society is actually flourishing in Nigeria. Many civil society groups have sprung up, including student groups, environmental groups, labor groups, and the previously mentioned women's groups. The Nigerian media is also pretty much free and open, and is owned by many private investors, which allows them to do things such as uncovering scandals and exposing corrupt government behaviors. Of course, this free and open media has come at somewhat of a price, as there have been instances of violent backlash against Nigerian journalists, particularly by emerging jihadist terrorist groups. Many Nigerians do believe that the media is somewhat biased, as it does most of its broadcasting out of southern Nigeria, and can sometimes skew the news against the anti-Christian north. If Nigeria is going to remain a unified and sovereign state moving forward in the 21st century, it is going to have to confront many modern challenges, none the least of which are its national question of how to effectively govern a nation that is so ethnically diverse. It's also going to have to confront its authoritarian roots and past if it's going to allow democracy to fully prosper, while at the same time putting down fears of future military interventions. It also will have to yield to international pressures to address human rights violations and economic inequalities. It will have to attempt to modernize its economy in order to do that. Perhaps the second most important thing it must do after addressing the national question is dealing with its high levels of corruption that are rampant through all of its political institutions. It also will have to truly make a secular and independent legal system and decentralize some of the power out of the hands of the executive. For all of these reasons and more, many political scientists refer to Nigeria as an unfinished state, a country in which the institutions are so unstable, both politically, socially, and economically, that it is very vulnerable to future collapse. And finally, one of the most significant threats to Nigeria in the modern times is that of terrorism, and the group Boko Haram is one of the most synonymous terrorist groups that comes out of this part of the world. Boko Haram was founded in the early 2000s by a Sunni Islamic fundamentalist sect that was advocating for a more strict and expansive form of Sharia law throughout the country. They became increasingly more radical as they moved into the 2010s and have waged a series of sophisticated attacks, including suicide bombings on police buildings and UN offices in the capital of Abuja. In the year 2014 alone, over 6,000 murders were attributed to Boko Haram and a large series of kidnappings of young girls who were later sold off. In 2015, Boko Haram pledged an allegiance to another terrorist organization, that of ISIL, making it even more dangerous. To date, the group is responsible for the deaths of over 20,000 people and the displacement of another 2.3 million who have fled to places like Cameroon, Chad, and Niger.